Alright guys, this is your host Matt 10. Welcome to my Madden 20 video on my All-Madden sliders. I've been working on this one for a minute. I've gone all over the place. I really have tested everything you can think of to get this game playing pretty good. As a base, I think the game's fantastic. I think the superstar abilities that are created here and introduced this year definitely brings a couple different variables, some positive, some negative. I do trust the Madden team's going to work on some of those things, hopefully reduce the effectiveness of, like the enforcer trait and things like that. But these sliders are a base, just as you see fit. But I'm just going to go over them here very briefly. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. So first off, like I said, we're playing All-Madden. You can play them at All-Pro. You may have to make some slight modifications to help the computer just a little bit, maybe in the quarterback accuracy, which I'll go through here in just a minute. So first off, this is skill level All-Madden. Game style is simulation. I like to play quarter length of 9 minutes. That's just my preferred minute. It's always worked. I usually get about 115, 120 plays in total. That's the goal. You can increase this or decrease it depending on what you want to do. You turn on accelerated clock. It really doesn't matter. My preference is just spend 9 minutes straight with no accelerated clock. From there, in terms of the gameplay helpers, really only defensive ball hawk is on just by default, so I've just kept that on. More importantly, those the player sliders here. Injuries are at 50. Fatigue is at 50. And then the player speed parity scale, which pretty much I used to call this just, speed threshold. And this value is at 85. Now, why so high? It's mainly to help the coverage, the pass coverage. There's been issues with Madden 20 out of the box with the coverage in general. Has not been up to the potential that it could be. Primarily from the user side more than anything. And so I wanted to really adjust this. I worked from values from as low as 5 to 10 and increments of 5 all the way up. My favorite is I started at 35, then I realized it's just not tight enough. Not like the NFL was playing more like college football, and that just wasn't going to work for us. So in this case, what I did here was just adjust that to 85. I really scaled it up gradually and found that 85 gets a lot of good understanding and logic of where the players are, what their assignment is, to stick to that assignment and then go from there, and then also make it where yards after catches are more prime real estate, if you will, where it has to be earned. And I think that's a big part of the NFL in general. So I think that's been established with 85, but of course all sliders are relative to one another. Next I'm going to go into the player skill. I'll go to the computer skill, and then I'll go to the penalties after that. So player skill, we've got passing, quarterback accuracy at 30. This is really just a nice little spot in which you still have to step up into the pocket and you still have to release the ball. You can't hold on to it for too long, as in you can't push the button too long where you're going to throw a really inaccurate bullet pass depending on who you're using. So it really makes who your actual quarterback is to really stand out. And then pass blocking is really just to put more pressure in terms of the pressure from the defensive line right away. I like this because it just makes you, we try to count 3 seconds at least in the pocket. A little bit over is not a bad thing, but I really like there to be pressure and make those decisions, make those routes, and make the way you have to, call your game to be held accountable to that. Next value from there is receiver catching at 45. I had this from 50 to 48, and I've been happy with 45 for a while. You'll still see some spectacular catches. You won't see many one-handed catches as often, which I was seeing a lot of at 45 and 50. So I've reduced this down to 45, and so now you're going to see realistic drops. Not so many, so you're not going to see like 5 or 6 drops. You'll see probably maximum I've seen has been 3. And again, it just depends on your play style. If you send a lot of passes, and curl routes with a defender covering your receiver, or you're trying to go long and hoping for a spectacular aggressive catch, you just never know what you're going to come out with. But the best thing about this year is that superstar abilities, so you definitely get some real excellent players that can make things happen for you. What I like about Madden is they've done a really good job at the ratings, and of course, they have an entire team dedicated to rating adjustments. So receiver catching is a big one for me, and 45 feels just about right. And from there, we go into the rushing. Run blocking is at 50, and then fumbles is at 55. Now, run blocking at 50, mainly because I haven't seen too much reason to change this. I have, like I mentioned earlier in the video, I have been all over the place with different values, and I've had this lower, I've had this higher. I like this where it's at the end of the day, because it controls a lot of the offensive lineman, defensive lineman interaction. There's a value in the penalties that helps this a little bit extra for the offensive line, but not so much that it's just automatic 5-6 yard gains each time. Again, it depends how you're calling the player, how the computer plays against you. What I like this year is the running back, whether it's the running back or if it's a defensive tackle or even defensive end, linebacker, safety, cornerback. They receive the ball or intercept the ball, whatever. Their running is pretty solid, and their awareness is really good too. And I think that's something that you haven't seen a lot in Madden. Even NCAA had to kind of find different ways to slider that into recognition in that reality. So I like this value of 50. You really have no reason to change it relative to the other values and relative to the speed threshold. And next value here is 55 for fumbles. This is mainly to guard against the big hits, the enforcer hits, so where every kind of hit stick is not just a fumble. You can go higher with this. I don't really see any issues with it. The main animation I look for with the fumbles here is the cover up from the computer and how effective it is as the user, how you can use her to cover up the football, because a hit's about to come. You better be ready for it. Hit that R1, cover up the football. Those fumbles will happen a lot less. I do that also, if I am controlling a receiver, I'll try to hold on to that, as I know a hit's about to happen, etc. So these two values have been pretty good, working in good harmony here. Next value from here is reaction time. And then we've got interceptions and pass coverage. So in the pass defense, we've got reaction time. I haven't touched reaction time at 50 and pass coverage at 50. So I haven't touched either one of these. And the reason for that is mainly because I have messed around with all of them and scaled it. Like I always say, I scale like crazy. I go all the way down to the lowest, I go to the highest. And it's all over. And I'll tell you, reaction time and pass coverage, they really, from my testing, they don't really have much, if any, impact on anything. It can actually negate some of the promising things, such as if you lower reaction time, you'll start to see some delayed reactions, delayed route recognition, and then if you raise it too high, you'll really start to see some bad animations where they're overreacting to certain routes, and that happens by default. There is a coverage bug in general with Madden 20, where the routes being seen are kind of, they're basically mirrored, but they're so tight that they're completely over marking, and so it creates this momentum imbalance, and they're completely out of position. Basically looks very hyper, like trying to play a press in the air, basically, and it looks pretty terrible. That animation is definitely creeped up, but thankfully I think the developers are aware of that. People have tweeted them what's going on there. So another reason why I just leave those two alone is just because as you adjust these values, you kind of lose the emphasis for what the other values came into play, such as my speed threshold at 85. That's going to keep them close together no matter what. And you don't want it so tight that there's no room to breathe, because then those yards after catch won't feel like they were earned. They're just going to feel like, it's going to be the samey type of game, and you want to game plan for a different experience each time, depending on who you face against, of course. So these two values, reaction time and pass coverage, have just stayed where they are. And from there, we've got interceptions at 25. This is mainly just to reduce interceptions, as simple as that sounds. It was at 50, of course, at default. I felt like there were too many interceptions, and with how tight the coverage is going to play, you don't want it to be a turnover fest. You'll just get really boring really fast. And defensive backs and safeties, they're there for a reason. They're not there to catch like receivers, and so some of them are pretty outstanding at it, but I don't feel like every single defensive back should be able to catch the ball the way receivers do. So 25 is good because you have to still earn to be in the right spot, and then to catch the ball is also, of course, the key right there with that interception value at 25. And then the next value here in terms of the defense is tackling. Now, I'm a big promoter of tackling under 50, and the reason for that is because I just like the animations more. I like the wrap-up tackles versus the big hit, WWE type of tackles. And so having it at 48 is just kind of the blend of both worlds. And the reason I like 48 is because now you get kind of like an attempt at gang tackling or kind of finish tackling. And what I mean by that is when somebody first goes in and tackles a player, they're basically that is their form of resistance, right? They're resisting them from reaching the next yard, however, inch or whatever. And then there's a finish tackle from another teammate who comes in and finishes the job. I want to see more of that. And as more of that happens, that kind of brings a sense of momentum-based tackling, which really is a nice nod to the physics that Madden 20 has. And I'm a big animations guy, and I like to see the physics play out. And it just seems more realistic to me. So I don't want the WWE hit tackles, but I can accept that they'll be there, especially if you have superstar abilities on. That's going to just happen, unfortunately. So tackling at 48, I have tested this at lower values in case anybody asks, and it's good. You get a lot more wrap-up tackles. You get some really cool animations, but the problem is the pursuit angles that are taken get worse. And that's really just the unfortunate part of, these kind of consolidated ratings, such as tackling. It's what kind of tackling is it? Is it a run tackle? Is it are you running at a receiver at a certain angle? Like, what kind of tackle is that? Is that accomplishing pursuit angles? I mean, so of course it's just a consolidated value. You don't really have an idea like what all that encompasses. And so what I've seen in my testing is it encompasses a lot, and unfortunately is kind of just a be all end all though. So you lower that and everything else comes with it. So this is kind of the teeter-totter, kind of the best balance of both worlds, having at 48. And the next values are the special teams: field goal power at 50, accuracy at 48, punt power at 46, and accuracy at 48, and then kickoff power at 50. Fairly self-explanatory. Haven't seen any reason to increase the field goal power or reduce it. I feel like the NFL kickers are well represented. Field goal accuracy, I feel like this could go down, but you don't want to go too crazy because, again, these values, you just never know what can happen. And especially as the computer, you can't really control, what they may look like, what animations might pull off. You can see some really bad misses that don't seem like NFL misses. And so this is kind of, again, the best of both worlds, having it at this value of 48. Punt power is really just the distance. You don't want this too high where, neither team will be able to, return the ball. And that's going to be unfortunate if you kind of don't get to see certain returns happen because the ball is always kicked into the back of the end zone, or there's always a punt for like 65 yards. It doesn't really seem realistic. I know it's definitely possible. There are some outstanding punters this day and age, but still you want to have that element of kind of a dangerous element in the special teams category. And that's another reason why punt accuracy is 48. It's definitely tough to be accurate with punting. The ball hitting the ground and then spinning backwards, it can't happen every time, but at 50 it tended to do that a lot, so just this value got dropped a little bit more. Last value, kickoff power, it's the same. It's not really needing to be changed. We know that this day and age you can kick the ball out of the end zone no problem, so kickoff power stays at 50. And jumping into the CPU skill, the computer skill here, there's really no difference, as you can see, other than QB accuracy and pass blocking. You see all the other values are the same as the user. Now, QB accuracy, why do we have that 20? Because quarterbacks are crazy in this game for the computer on All-Madden. They make pretty much every pass, and you'll see Robo QB be thrown around a lot. It's very true. It definitely happens. And so having it at 20 is kind of the best balance I've seen, to where some of the passes look like they're miscommunication type of passes, and that's more common of the type of bad passes that you see in the NFL. You will see the odd one where they just kind of throw it up and just hope somebody catches it. You also see the one where they hold on for too long, and that's just unfortunate. It has nothing to do with the QB accuracy. I've raised this up, lowered it, trying to solve problems for EA where there's the one where the quarterback keeps dropping back and dropping back and dropping back and resets. It looks to happen on more longer routes like 4 verts or anything like that. But again, the developers are aware of that, and kind of what's probably been having some people not start their franchise modes because they're hoping some of these bugs are ironed out, which is probably when you'll start seeing any of my franchise that I'll be doing in the near future. I just want those bugs to be ironed out personally. That's a really big one because that makes it so easy to sack the computer because they're just, they have no idea what they're doing. Instead of scrambling, they choose to drop back, and drop back. And of course, it depends on the traits, etc. But in this regard, it's definitely a tough one to swallow as you're adjusting sliders. But the reason we have this at 20 is just simply because you're just going to get the best type of throws, good variety of throws, and enough that's humanizing the computer. The last value for the computer, since all the other values are the same as the user, pass blocking. Pass blocking is at 30. I want to give pressure. I like pressure on the O-line. The offensive line, defensive line interaction needs to be intact, and having this pass blocking lower is going to make that happen. It puts an emphasis for the quarterback to make their reads, go through their progression, and shorten those routes. It changes the way they're going to, challenge you and the way you should call your defense. So you probably can't try to blitz every single down. It's probably going to get exposed with a slant or something else. There will be dump off passes. There'll be screen passes, etc. So this is a good value that I've seen. I haven't really seen too many negatives. You're not going to be sack masters or anything like that unless you're using superstar abilities and maybe you've got a certain player with a certain X factor. Forgive me with all the terminology. I'm still learning as I go with this new superstar abilities and X factors, etc. So there are some elements there that you have to be aware of that can affect it. And if you start to see maybe it's too easy, you see the rating matchup with an offensive lineman, you shouldn't be beating them or something like that, we'll go ahead and raise this value. That shouldn't be a problem. But just remember, my focus is always animations, and I want to see good animations at the line of scrimmage. And this pass blocking paired up with one of the penalty values, which I'll go over to next, it really makes it for some interesting animations and good dynamic play overall. And speaking of the penalty values here, this is again on the main menu. This is offside at 35. The reason, and this is purely my own testing and what I've seen to test and try to get animations to play out. I mentioned earlier how I don't touch the pass coverage and I don't touch the reactions. Well, this value right here at 35 is kind of what I've used to substitute that element or that value for. So pass coverage and pass reaction are all kind of folded into the offside. And the theory behind this is basically at the line of scrimmage, offside means you're breaching the line of scrimmage onto the other side. It's a penalty. It's the same concept here that I started to see with different animations in which the players wouldn't breach into, the defensive backs rather, wouldn't breach into the receiver's area, meaning they wouldn't ever try to go and try to get the ball or try to deflect it or try to get in between the path of the ball and the receiver as often. They would basically watch them kind of catch the ball first and then tackle them. So the reason I have this at 35 is because I want to force them to have this mentality that they're going to breach, even if it causes a penalty, but it's still going to breach that. And as you can see in some of the gameplay video, it definitely is on point with that because they're no longer just watching the receiver catch the ball, respecting all matchups and sizes, of course, but they're no longer just watching them catch the ball and then tackling them. I want them to be, defending the pass. They want to prevent field position, from being an advantage of the offense. So naturally, I want to see them breach and make a play on the ball. And this is basically how that's happened. And the next value is one that's actually not shown here on the main menu, but it is defensive holding. Oddly enough, and this could segue into a whole nother thing, but in general with Madden, and especially Madden 20 here, you see certain values that aren't in the main menu, but they're in the franchise menu, believe it or not. One of them as well is an ineligible receiver downfield. If you go into the franchise menu, you'll even see that it's not even in there. And you see this is in a franchise, and just to show you guys that again, here we're in a franchise using, I'm just testing teams, so in this case I'm using the Cardinals. Where if we go to gameplay sliders here, you can see at the very bottom, we're going to go this way, if you can see defensive holding shows up, but it wasn't there in the main menu, but it's here in the franchise menu, oddly enough. But now you don't see that ineligible receiver down the field penalty either, believe it or not. So that's definitely a strange one. And where can it be? You actually have to start a game. So here we're actually in a franchise game, and if you go to your settings here and go to penalties, here first defensive holding's nowhere to be found again, but ineligible receiver downfield is founded here, yet it's not on the franchise menu, and it's defaulted to off as soon as you get in the game. So even if you enabled it on the main menu, imported it into the franchise menu, now start a game, it's off by default. So what you need to do is go in and turn it on. So the next step here, we're going to go into the options sliders and then gameplay sliders. And you can see we've got default here. Now we're just going to go ahead and import the sliders that we had in the main menu. And this is the best way to do sliders. I don't recommend changing sliders in just the franchise menu. This game, as you'll see in some of the penalties, etc., it's all out of sync at times, and so just keep it as uniform as possible to what you can control. So this is why I recommend the import custom sliders. Just choose Y for import custom sliders, click yes, it'll grab the ones that are in the main menu, and there you go. You can see they're all there, including the game options and including the penalties, with the exception of a couple that don't come through. For example, defensive holding, since it's not in the main menu, you have to manually change it to 45. And I like 45. And the reason I like 45 is because it helps the DB and receiver interaction. It lets them hold them at the line just a little bit longer so they can kind of get disrupted out of their routes. It doesn't happen all the time, but it just makes it more so it's competitive in that space, not just basically giving the receiver all the room in the world, and not not to the point that they're just holding on to them for dear life. But it can happen. The nice thing is these penalties, if you reduce them, some of these like offside and defensive holding, I haven't seen defensive holding called, to be honest, but I have seen offside called plenty of times. So defensive holding, if it's not called already at 50, why not just adjust it here to help the game play out? I'll be honest, guys, and this will come up, I went a little crazy with some of my updated versions of the set that I'm not posting here because I've since gone back to this version completely, and I did go a little crazy with penalty values and trying to help it with gameplay. Anybody that tells you that penalties don't help gameplay really don't know what they're talking about. Think about it of just it's animations that appear if they're on or if they're off, and depending on what level, how, think about penalties as if it's what the players will get away with if they're not called, right? So like if you lower holding for, that's going to apply to the offense. So if you have pass block at like 0, but you have holding at 0, that means you're really playing like a true 50, because essentially holding's not going to get called. So now you're going to see a lot more holding animation, but it's not going to get called. So it's essentially like it's pass blocking is better. So that's just an example. But honestly, I stress this, especially I may have to just repeat this to myself, but don't go down this rabbit hole. You'll go crazy trying to do it, and that's exactly what I did. And that is all I've got for this video, guys. Let me know your comments below, what you thought about the sliders. Next video I have out will show the sliders in action, but make sure to give the video a like, leave your comments, like I said, and as always, take care and stay tuned.